The private wing of Children's Hospital of Philadelphia resembled a luxury hotel, more than a medical facility, with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city's skyline. But in room 412, 12-year-old Jake Morrison lay motionless in his hospital bed, staring at the ceiling with the hollow eyes of someone who had given up fighting. David Morrison, 38 years old and worth $1.2 billion from his medical software empire, sat helplessly in the leather chair beside his son's bed. His company had revolutionized hospital management systems worldwide, but all his technological genius couldn't solve the problem in front of him. "I'm tired, Dad," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of expensive medical equipment. "I don't want to fight anymore." Jake had been diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia at age 10. The first round of treatment lasted 8 brutal months, but he achieved remission and returned to normal life. At 11, the cancer returned more aggressively. Another year of chemotherapy, radiation, and experimental treatments brought a second remission that lasted only 6 months. Now, at 12 years old, Jake faced his third relapse, the most dangerous and treatment-resistant form his oncologist had ever seen. His body, weakened by 2 previous battles, could barely tolerate the aggressive chemotherapy required for the experimental bone marrow transplant that offered his only chance at long-term survival. The treatment had a 60% success rate, but required months of brutal chemotherapy that would push Jake's already compromised immune system to the breaking point. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the head of pediatric oncology, had explained that they needed to begin within 48 hours, or Jake's body would be too weak to withstand the procedure. "I want to stop," Jake had told David 3 days earlier, his words hitting like physical blows. "I'm ready to go be with God and not hurt anymore." David had spent $25,000 trying to motivate his son to continue fighting. Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the city's most renowned child psychiatrist, at $2,000 per session, had conducted 8 meetings with Jake over 2 weeks. Her diagnosis was clinical but unhelpful. "He's experiencing anticipatory grief and treatment fatigue." Dr. Harper recommended antidepressants and intensive motivational therapy, but Jake refused to engage with her expensive visualization techniques and positive thinking exercises. "I'm not being negative," he told her during their final session. "I'm just tired of hurting." Dr. James Peterson, a renowned pediatric psychologist, charging $1,500 per session, specialized in fighting spirit counseling. He used advanced cognitive behavioral techniques and motivational interviewing, but Jake remained politely unresponsive to his efforts. "Maybe this is just my time," Jake had told Dr. Peterson. "Maybe I'm supposed to stop suffering now." Even Reverend Michael Collins, the hospital chaplain trained in grief counseling, couldn't reach Jake's guarded heart. The boy listened respectfully to discussions about God's plan and eternal hope, then quietly said, "Maybe God's plan is for me to stop fighting and find peace." The expensive private room reflected David's desperate attempts to create comfort for his dying son. Custom furniture worth $50,000, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, gourmet meals prepared by celebrity chefs, none of it mattered. Jake barely touched the food, ignored the entertainment, and spent his days staring out the window at the city below. His medical team had assembled the finest specialists money could buy. Dr. Mitchell led a team of 8 doctors, each expert in different aspects of pediatric cancer treatment. They had access to experimental drugs worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, cutting-edge imaging technology, and treatment protocols from the world's leading cancer centers. But Jake had quietly disconnected from all of it. He took his medications when required, submitted to blood draws and examinations, but did so with the mechanical compliance of someone going through motions while waiting for the end. David's business empire had been built on solving complex problems through technology and data analysis. He approached Jake's illness the same way, hiring the best minds, investing in the most advanced treatments, analyzing every piece of research. But for the first time in his life, money and expertise couldn't purchase what he needed most: his son's will to live. The social worker Jennifer Martinez had gently warned David about pediatric treatment refusal. Children Jake's age had the legal right to refuse treatment in Pennsylvania, and courts rarely overruled a mature minor's decision about their own medical care, especially when facing such aggressive interventions. "We can't force him to want to live," she had explained during their last meeting. "The treatment is brutal enough when patients are fully committed. When they're not." David spent sleepless nights walking the hospital corridors, watching other families face similar battles. Some children fought with incredible determination, inspiring everyone around them. Others, like Jake, seemed to accept their fate with a peaceful resignation that terrified their parents. That's when Ruth Washington arrived for her first night shift in the private wing. Ruth was 45 years old, originally from inner-city Detroit, with 15 years of pediatric nursing experience. She had recently transferred from the general pediatric ward to the private wing, seeking better hours after her youngest child graduated college. A single mother who had raised 4 children while working double shifts, Ruth brought practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge to her patient care. Her personnel file noted excellent patient reviews and a reputation for connecting with difficult cases, but David barely noticed the new night nurse. He was focused on the stack of second opinions from oncologists at Johns Hopkins Memorial Sloan Kettering and St. Jude Children's Hospital. Ruth's first assessment of Jake was purely professional. She checked his vital signs, adjusted his IV medications, and reviewed his chart with the efficiency of someone who had cared for thousands of sick children. She noticed that he hadn't touched his dinner and had refused his evening medications. "He's given up," David warned her during their brief introduction. "Nothing motivates him anymore. The experts say it's normal behavior for children facing terminal illness." Ruth nodded politely, but something in Jake's file caught her attention. A note about his previous interests in basketball and comic books, activities he had abandoned months ago. She had seen this before in children who felt alone in their suffering. "Sometimes giving up is just being tired of fighting alone," she told David quietly. As Ruth settled into her 12-hour night shift, she noticed Jake lying awake staring at the city lights through his window. Most children his age would be sleeping, but Jake seemed to find peace in the quiet darkness. When the hospital's daytime energy finally calmed, she would soon discover that Jake wasn't ready to die. He was just waiting for someone to show him a reason to keep living. Ruth's approach differed fundamentally from the expensive specialists who had tried to motivate Jake. Instead of pushing conversation or forcing optimism, she provided excellent medical care while respecting his silence. During her first week, she noticed patterns that others had missed. Jake slept fitfully during the day, but stayed awake during her night shifts, watching the city lights as if drawing comfort from their steady presence. "You don't have to talk to me, Jake," Ruth said during her second night, while checking his IV line with gentle competence. "I'm just here if you need anything." Jake was surprised by a nurse who didn't try to fix his attitude or force cheerful conversation. Ruth worked quietly, adjusting his blankets without waking him when he dozed, bringing warm compresses for his aching joints without being asked, never disrupting the peaceful silence he seemed to crave. Her nursing style reflected years of experience with critically ill children. She understood that sometimes the greatest gift was simply competent, caring presence without demands for emotional engagement. Jake began to notice small details, how Ruth moved efficiently through her tasks without creating noise that would wake other patients, how she anticipated his needs before he expressed them, how she treated him with dignity rather than pity. During the second week, Jake and Ruth developed a quiet nighttime routine during her 12-hour shifts. The hospital corridor grew peaceful after midnight, with only the soft sounds of medical equipment and distant city traffic filtering through the windows. "You work the hardest shift," Jake observed one night around 2 a.m., breaking several days of silence. Ruth looked up from organizing his medications. "Night shift suits me. Always has. Quieter time to actually care for people instead of managing chaos." "Do you have kids?" Jake asked his first personal question to any staff member in weeks. Ruth paused in her work, choosing her words carefully. "I had a son. He was a little older than you." Jake noticed the past tense, but didn't push, sensing the weight of unspoken story. Over the following nights, Ruth shared carefully chosen memories about Marcus as a child. his dreams of becoming a teacher, his infectious laugh, his kindness to younger children who looked up to him. He wanted to work with kids who needed extra help, Ruth explained, while adjusting Jake's position to relieve pressure sores. Said too many children felt invisible, and he wanted to make sure they knew someone cared about them. "Where is he now?" Jake finally asked during their third week of nighttime conversations. Ruth was quiet for a long moment, straightening the items on his bedside table with unnecessary precision. "He's not with us anymore. But he taught me something important before he died." "What?" Jake's voice carried genuine curiosity for the first time in months. "That giving up and letting go are two different things." Jake considered this deeply, turning the words over in his mind like a puzzle he needed to solve. "What's the difference?" "Giving up means you stop caring about anything. Letting go means you stop fighting things you can't control so you can focus on things you can." This distinction resonated with Jake in a way that months of expensive therapy had not. He began asking careful questions about Marcus, what he was like, what made him laugh, how he handled difficult situations. Ruth shared stories, gradually painting a picture of a teenager who faced his own challenges with courage and compassion. "Marcus was sick too, you know," Ruth revealed during their fourth week of conversations. "He had severe asthma since childhood, couldn't play sports like other kids. But he found other ways to be strong." "Like what?" "He tutored younger kids who struggled in school, made everyone laugh when they felt discouraged, found ways to help people even when his own breathing was hard." Jake absorbed this information with growing interest. "Do you think he was scared of being different? I mean," Ruth considered her answer carefully. "Of being different? Probably. Of not making a difference? Definitely. That scared him more than anything." "What would Marcus say about my situation?" "He'd say you get to choose your own kind of strong. Fighting doesn't always mean taking more treatment. Sometimes it means deciding what's worth fighting for." "What if I'm not strong enough for more treatment?" Ruth met his eyes directly. "Marcus would say being strong isn't about not being scared. It's about what you choose to do when you are scared." Jake's voice became smaller, more vulnerable. "I'm scared. Really, really scared." Ruth's expression filled with understanding. "Good. That means you still care about living." This conversation marked a turning point in Jake's emotional state. For the first time since his relapse, he admitted to feeling something other than resigned acceptance. The fear he had been hiding, fear of pain, of hope, of disappointment, finally had a voice. "Marcus sounds like he was brave," Jake said, after a long silence. "He was, but not because he wasn't afraid. He was brave because he chose to care about other people, even when he was struggling." "How did he die?" Jake asked quietly. Ruth had been expecting this question, but still needed a moment to gather her courage. "Marcus was walking home from basketball practice one evening. Wrong place, wrong time." She paused, then decided Jake deserved the truth. "A drive-by shooting. He was 16, had never hurt anybody in his life." Jake processed this information with the gravity of a child who understood that death wasn't always fair or meaningful. "So he didn't choose to die?" "No, but he chose how to live right up until the end." "What do you mean?" Ruth's voice grew thick with memory and pride. 3 younger kids were walking near him when the shooting started. Marcus threw himself on top of them to protect them from the bullets. Jake's eyes widened. "He died trying to save other people." "He did. All 3 of those children survived because of what Marcus chose to do in that moment." "He sounds like a hero." Ruth's eyes filled with tears she rarely allowed herself to shed. "He was. But not because he died. Because of how he chose to live every single day." This revelation about Marcus created a new framework for Jake to understand his own situation. Here was a boy who had faced physical limitations, who had every reason to feel sorry for himself, but who instead focused on helping others. Marcus hadn't chosen his circumstances, but he had chosen his response to them. For the first time in months, Jake began to consider that his own choices might matter more than his circumstances. "What would Marcus think about me wanting to give up?" Jake asked. Ruth chose her words carefully. "He'd understand being tired and scared, but he'd probably ask you what you wanted to fight for, not what you wanted to fight against." Jake spent the rest of that night staring out his window, but for the first time in weeks, He wasn't waiting to die. He was beginning to wonder if there might be something worth living for that he hadn't considered yet. Fan 3. Crisis plus Breakthrough 802 Chinsak. Week 5 brought the medical team's final deadline. Dr. Mitchell approached David with clinical urgency that barely masked her frustration. "We need Jake's decision about the bone marrow transplant within 48 hours, she explained. "After that, his body will be too compromised to withstand the preparatory chemotherapy. We're losing our window." David felt the weight of impossible choices. Force his son into treatment he didn't want, or watch him die from a disease that might still be curable. "Jake, please," he pleaded during their afternoon visit. "Let them try the treatment. I can't lose you." Jake looked at his father with eyes that seemed older than his 12 years. "Dad, I'm just so tired of fighting and losing anyway." Ruth overheard this conversation from the hallway and made a decision that would change everything. That evening she brought something she had never shared with any patient, Marcus's personal journal. A worn leather book he had written in daily for 3 years before his death. Marcus wrote in this every single day, Ruth explained, sitting beside Jake's bed with the journal in her hands. Even when his asthma was bad, even when kids at school teased him for being different, Jake looked at the journal with curiosity mixed with respect. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Marcus wrote about kids like you." Ruth opened to a page she had memorized and read aloud. "Saw a kid at the hospital today, getting chemotherapy. He was bald and really skinny, but he smiled at me when I walked by. Made me think if he can fight cancer, I can fight anything. Cancer kids are the bravest people alive." Jake's eyes widened with surprise. Marcus knew about kids with cancer. He volunteered in the children's cancer ward every weekend for 2 years before he died, Ruth revealed. "You and kids like you were his heroes." He said cancer patients taught him what real courage looked like. This revelation fundamentally shifted Jake's understanding of his situation. He had seen himself as weak for wanting to give up, but Marcus, this boy he had come to admire, had seen cancer patients as the strongest people he knew. Ruth reached into her pocket and pulled out several folded papers. "Marcus wrote letters too. Letters he wanted me to share with kids like you someday." She unfolded the first letter and began reading. "Dear brave kid, I don't have cancer, but I know something about fighting for your life every single day. Every breath is hard for me because of my asthma, and sometimes I want to give up too." Jake leaned forward, hanging on every word. "But I learned something important. The fight isn't about winning or losing. It's about showing other people they can fight too. When you fight, even when you're scared, you give hope to someone else who wants to give up." Ruth continued reading. "Maybe there's a little kid just starting treatment who needs to see that someone else made it through. Maybe there's another kid who wants to quit, and your courage will help them keep going. Your fight matters more than you know." Jake's eyes filled with tears, the first real emotion he had shown in weeks. He really wrote this 3 days before he died. He made me promise to share it with children who needed to hear it. That night, Jake asked Ruth to take him to visit the pediatric oncology ward. In a wheelchair wearing his Superman pajamas, he met 6-year-old Maria, a Hispanic girl, starting her first chemotherapy cycle. Her parents were crying, overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty. Maria noticed Jake's bald head immediately. "Are you sick like me?" "Yeah," Jake replied. "I've been fighting this for 2 years. Are you scared?" Jake thought about Marcus's words. "Yeah, I'm scared. But you know what? Sometimes being scared means you're being really brave. Will you be my friend while I fight this?" Jake looked at Ruth, understanding flooding his face. This was what Marcus had meant. His fight could give others hope. His courage, even when imperfect, could inspire someone else to keep going. "Yes," he told Maria firmly, "and I'll tell you something important. You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. None of us fight alone." Jake turned to Maria's parents with wisdom beyond his years. "It's really, really hard, but she's going to surprise you with how strong she is. And there are people here who understand exactly what you're going through." When they returned to his room, Jake found David reading through the latest consultation reports with desperate hope. "Dad," Jake said quietly, "I want to try the treatment." David looked up with shock and overwhelming relief. "Not because I'm not scared, Jake continued. Because maybe my fight helps other kids fight too. Maybe someone like Maria needs to see that it's possible to keep going when everything hurts. David's eyes filled with tears he had been holding back for months. Are you sure? Ruth, will you tell me more stories about Marcus during my treatment? Jake asked. Every day, Ruth promised. And maybe you can write your own letters for kids who come after you. Jake nodded with the first real smile anyone had seen from him in months. I want to fight like Marcus fought, not just for myself, but for other people who need hope. David cried openly for the first time since Jake's diagnosis. Finally understanding that his son hadn't found a reason to die, he had found a reason to live. 8 months later, Jake Morrison became the youngest patient in Children's Hospital of Philadelphia history to complete their intensive rehabilitation program. His room overflowed with thank you cards from children he had inspired during their own treatment journeys. The Marcus's Letters program had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Jake spent hours writing encouragement to newly diagnosed patients, sharing Marcus's wisdom alongside his own hard-won insights about finding courage in impossible circumstances. I fight for Marcus, for Maria, for all the kids who need to see that it's possible, Jake explained to a reporter documenting his recovery. I learned that being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about fighting even when you're afraid, because someone else needs to see you try. Ruth had been officially promoted to Patient Experience Coordinator, developing peer mentorship programs based on Jake's experience. Her innovative approach to connecting patients with shared experiences was being studied by children's hospitals nationwide. David's perspective had transformed completely. He reduced his work hours to spend time with Jake, finally understanding that presence mattered more than productivity. His company had developed a mobile app connecting young cancer patients globally, allowing them to share encouragement and support across distances. Jake visited the pediatric ward weekly, always carrying Marcus's journal and his own growing collection of letters from grateful families. His hair had grown back thicker than before, and his smile carried the confidence of someone who had faced death and chosen life. The memorial display case in the hospital lobby featured Marcus's journal alongside his photograph and Jake's first letter to future patients. Thousands of children had read Marcus's words about courage and purpose, finding strength in the wisdom of a 16-year-old boy who had understood that true heroism meant caring about others even in the midst of personal struggle. Maria, now in remission herself, had become Jake's closest friend and fellow peer mentor. Together they visited newly diagnosed children, proving that survival was possible and friendship could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. If Jake's story reminded you that sometimes our greatest strength comes from knowing we're not alone in our struggles, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I share stories about how shared experiences can heal even the deepest despair. Which moment moved you most, when Jake met Maria and realized his fight could inspire others, or when Ruth shared Marcus's letters that gave Jake purpose beyond himself? Share in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful medicine doesn't come from a prescription bottle. It comes from someone who shows us that our struggles have meaning beyond ourselves.